In the name of the one holy and living God. Amen. Almost forgot to keep going with the sermon because I was having so much fun watching them do Alleluia in sign language. It's great. You should get them to demonstrate for you. It's a real expression of the feeling. When I was growing up, there was a sign that was on the refrigerator. I don't remember exactly where, but it was a proverb that my mom had put up there that has really stuck with me through the ages. It's, I think, a fairly common one. You all may have heard it also. It goes like this: tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I'll understand. Have you heard that? I think it's kind of a teacher's proverb. Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I'll understand. I think that's the theme of what is going on with the one that we call Thomas the Doubter, Doubting Thomas. We look at this story, and tradition has kind of looked at him negatively as the man who didn't intellectually agree with the idea that Jesus had been resurrected from the dead, and the one who didn't have his kind of science and faith all reconciled so that he could believe. Only I don't think that's what's going on at all. I think we're making a much more sophisticated 20th century kind of argument about doubting Thomas than what was really happening in that time and in that day in an upper room. See, what was really happening is 10 disciples, 10 close friends of Jesus who loved him, were scared to death. He had been executed, and they were feeling pretty low. They had betrayed him. They had seen all of their hopes and dreams with him and for him dashed. They were kind of the ultimate in depressed and scared. And in the middle of that, they had an experience. Jesus involved them in his risen life. He showed up and was there with them. And it changed everything. From that point on, the description of the apostles is that they had courage. They laid down their lives for their faith. They were joyful, it says. They were exuberant. They were no longer fearful and sad. They had experienced something that changed them. And the difference is Thomas wasn't there. And he didn't have that same experience. That's what he was describing, I think, when he said that he wasn't going to believe until he too had had that experience. And that's understandable, isn't it? I think it is. I mean, how can you expect simply to get something by someone telling you? It's a good tool, but for the most part, we really have learned the truth of that proverb, that it's through experience, through doing, through actually being involved in something that you understand it. All you have to do is take driving somewhere new as an example. If I'm in the passenger seat, if I'm not involved in the directions, you can forget my ever finding my way again. But if I'm driving and I'm involved in deciding which way to turn when, then I get it and I hold on to it. That's what Thomas was longing for. And I think that that's something our generation is longing for. Generation X kind of people have kind of set a new tone from baby boomers and the greater generations before them. They've said kind of, at least as a generation as a whole, that something, if they are going to trust it, if they're going to believe it, needs to be authentic. It needs to be grounded in some experience as well as having the information. They're not willing to just trust that because you said so, it's true. And I can understand that. Look at the internet. There is so much information out there. We need to test what's true based on some kind of experience. And that's what Thomas was about. He was living that proverb. of wanting to understand the resurrection, the risen Lord, by experiencing what his other 10 friends had experienced. And the nice thing to take note of is 2 parts. One, though he wasn't there, God sent Jesus one more time to show up for those who missed church that day. So, while it's not a carte blanche excuse for not being here, the point is that God will continue to show up for God's people so that we all have the chance to be involved, to know and understand the risen Lord. And the other thing is that when Jesus does show up the next week, the second time for Thomas, he's not berating him, he's not scolding him, he's just welcoming him into the experience so that he can know and understand and be included in it as well. There's a group that I'm part of. Actually, there are 2 groups I'm a part of, if I'm honest. One is a Cursillo reunion group. It meets Mondays at 5:30. But since I've been living with my father-in-law, I'm not always in Fernandina, so I started a new group, a Renovare spiritual formation group. And I meet with that group on Wednesday evenings or afternoons at 3:30. And there's one question that's the first one we ask when we get together. There's a similar one that's the first question you ask as part of your spiritual grouping in Cursillo reunion groups. But the question goes like this. Every time we ask ourselves, in what way has God made his presence known to me this week? In other words, how have I experienced God this week? How have I been involved in the risen Lord so that I'm not just being told about God week after week, but I'm involved in a relationship and awareness of God's presence week after week? We're standing with Thomas saying we want to get it by experiencing it. And we experience it better when we're looking for it, when we're aware, when we've reflected on how that happens for us. I'll tell you that one of the ways that I can identify with those disciples in the other upper room that day when Jesus first appeared as the risen Lord is to tell you that I think what they experienced has some universal aspects for us. I think these are the ways in which we experience the presence of God over and over again. Let me just share a few of them. The first one is that as Jesus appears, the way they experience him is through his revealing that he bears the scars and the marks of wounds. He shows them his hands and his side. There's a book written by Henri Nouwen called The Wounded Healer, and it changed my life. It changed my life because I realized that just because I had plenty of scars in my life, just because I had a background that I thought wouldn't prepare me very well for being a helper to other people because I'd had pretty mixed up growing up myself, that instead, actually, the fact is that it is often the case that God makes his presence known to us through sharing our wounds, through sharing our sufferings with each other. Mother Teresa said it very clearly, one who cannot experience suffering can't share in serving those who are suffering. You just can't do it. Henri Nouwen makes the case in his book that it is exactly sometimes through our woundedness that we're best able to reach out to someone else. In fact, it's the only way, really. So that's why things happen for us that are that exact experience. That's how I've experienced it. Nobody can help me feel and know the healing power of God's love and the wholeness that can come from it better than someone who knows what it feels like to go through what I'm going through. That is the most healing thing. That's why parents who've lost a child gravitate towards other parents who've lost a child. They know that God's healing power, that the presence of God comes to them through revealing their wounds with each other, sharing in their sufferings. That's why things like AA and recovery groups work. You're sharing out of your woundedness. We do it all over the place with support groups for people with autism or all kinds of things. Those are the ways that God makes his presence known over and over again through human history, by revealing the wounds with one another. One of the other ways God's presence is so clearly made known to me is through the kind of open-handedness, that's the way I describe it anyway, that Jesus comes to the disciples with. In all the pictures of this scene, you see him like this with his palms extended. Yes, exposing his wounds, but there's so much more involved in that. So much more symbolism and is communicated through that. Jesus could have come back going like this, couldn't he? They had betrayed him. They'd run away. They had fallen short in every way. They could have been in big trouble. But Jesus didn't come to do anything other than to welcome them back into his presence. There's a piece of the Financial Peace University class that we do that creates this image that has stuck with me for just all the weeks and months since I first saw it. Dave Ramsey, the teacher's on video describing how it is that we learn to live with the kind of peace that Jesus brings to the disciples, that Jesus brings to us. He describes it as living not with a closed hand, but with an open hand. He says, even a dog knows the difference between a closed hand and an open hand. Haven't you ever gone up to a dog and gone like this? And what do? They recognize it as a universal sign of peace and welcome, an invitation to be connected. That's the way Jesus comes, and it's peaceful, and it's peace-giving, and it's freeing. I've learned that whether it's about money, the presence of God is most made known to me when I deal with people, with money, with situations with an open hand rather than a closed fist. I recognize God's presence when I can both give and receive more fully and freely. Jesus comes to them, vulnerably offering himself, freely giving and receiving, and that's one of the ways we know his presence wherever we are, even now. And the last thing that really comes home for me is the sense of joyful celebration and homecoming that seems to make it clear that God is present. That's how I know it's real. None of the facts of the story would tell me nearly as much as the fact that apparently those people walked out from that experience and were full of joy instead of sadness and fear. They experienced a kind of reunion, a reconciliation, a forgiveness of what had happened, a rejoicing because they were together again. That kind of homecoming is one of the ways that I experience glimpses of knowing that God is present. It happens to me every Easter, and I never expect it on Easter. On All Saints' Day, I expect to think about people I've loved who've died. That's what we traditionally do. We call out their names. But on Easter, I'm always caught off guard because in the middle of the celebration of Jesus' resurrection, of new life being breathed into him, and what was dead and separated is now reunited with life and love. All of a sudden, I think about Peggy, and I think about Jim and Lorraine and the people I've loved who've died. And I'm rejoicing that I sense glimpses that their love, that their aliveness is present now. I have that sense of homecoming, that I'm really not all that separated from them. Easter reminds me of that homecoming, that forgiveness and reconciliation, that being together again with those we love. And that's what they experienced in Jesus' presence that Sunday in the upper room, and it's what I experience. Aren't those things the kinds of things that help you know and be able to say, as Thomas did after he had the chance to get involved, to not just trust somebody else's word about it, but to experience for himself, saying, my Lord and my God. He got it. He understood. And I think one of the best tools you and I have for understanding and being able to say with him, my Lord and my God, is to keep asking ourselves over and over again, in what way has God made his presence known to me today? It'll happen just like it did for them. Amen.